Okay, we're here with Too Good. So how are you doing at the moment?
Yeah, pretty good. Turned up, which is always a bonus. Enjoying the tournament, enjoying the lounge. Germany's good fun.
Okay, I wanted to start off a bit in kind of like your playing career, because the funny thing is, like to a lot of people, you probably are famous purely for the commentary and for like Quake and stuff like that. There's a lot of people, because you take for granted how many people started after every year, you know? And so as a result, like, let's go not super far back, but let's just talk about the Quake 3 period initially. And so the thing I wanted to go back to was, whenever I think of you now, and you're kind of like a lovable rogue character who the community embraces, I always remember that when I used to read like Challenge UK, this Quake site that was from the UK scene, you were like one of the, like a villainous character almost. You were kind of like this cocky young guy who was, you got into I think UNR and you had a friend who was like in 4K, and basically everyone, the only thing everyone agreed on was that you shouldn't be in these teams and that like you were talking too much shit and stuff. So what do you remember of this period?
Basically, when I set out to do stuff and to be in Quake 3, I played it on 56k ISDN. It was like one of the worst connections you can have, right? And when I set out with goals, I like making it a little bit more fun. I like making sure people who know who are at the top of the game that I'm coming after them, and basically one day I'm going to be as good as you or better than you. And basically it motivated me as well. It was like, yeah, I mean, all the top teams, when I joined UNR specifically, I got into UNR because I played Clan Arena. And I was playing Clan Arena, and like Rude, UNR Rude, saw me play Clan Arena, and that's all I played. You know, I was like maybe as good as Mist or Fox, you know, like not as good, but I was like, in Clan Arena, I was like almost their level, but they were obviously a lot better than me at TDM. So he saw me play Clan Arena and was like, dude, boom, you know, get into UNR. And I'd only been playing Quake like for like 6 months, so it was like quite a fast transaction. And when I got on UNR, I was by far the shittest player in the team. And I used to play versus like the top teams with UNR, and sometimes Blokey couldn't turn up, and basically UNR would lose the practice game, and then Blokey would turn up and be like, oh, I'll play, and I'd be like, well, I'm obviously the guy who's gonna sit, and then they win, and they'd be like, and the other team was like, because I'd already like had like an image of, you know, they were like smack talk me down, like, oh yeah, you know, and so I just kept playing. I definitely was a villain. I definitely wound a lot of people up, but it was so fun. It was so much fun because it's like, you know that when you kill them, they're just like, fucking Jay, man, like that guy. And then I actually went to university, I got a cable connection, and then I was definitely in like one of the best UK TDMers. But I never joined the team who were the best team, like Iron Fist, pretty much because I pissed most of them off throughout my career, so I stayed with the DC guys. But I definitely enjoyed it, and it kept me motivated to be a villain, really. It's a bit of fun. I liked it.
Actually, what you were saying there about starting out on like 56k, then going to ISDN, people probably forget, but back in the early 2000s, especially in the UK, basically either people who lived in London, or you went to university, or had some weird scenario like that where they were in like the ideal spot, had like amazing cable modems, and ADSL hadn't really been rolled out then, so everyone else had either like super shit ISDN or just worse. And so, I mean, I know from talking to you in the past, like you kind of felt like some people maybe had like a better connection than their actual game merited, and some people were really good on ISDN who maybe as a result, it seemed like there was parity, but there wouldn't have been if there'd have been like fair connections for everyone. Like, how can you going to describe that era and your thoughts?
Well, yeah, it was definitely true in the way that there were some people at university in the pro gaming scene that really got an advantage in game, and I used to play against like Four Kings and like Gun, and I was on ISDN, and I was with Blokey at the time, and we were in a team, and basically, you know, for anybody watching like League of Legends, Dota and stuff, you can kind of imagine a TDM setup. It's a 4v4 team. You have like a carry still. You have the guy that you want to give the items to, make him a little bit stronger than the rest of the team, and he's going to go out and do all the damage. Then you want the guy who plays like a support guy. He's the guy that looks after the area, looks after the team, secures the doors, but he doesn't have a lot of armor. So I desperately wanted to be be the guy that would like carry, right? And so I used to take the armor and I used to run out there and I used to find gun, and when I got this close to him, it was like a bubble of like lag, because he had a cable connection, I had ISDN. I couldn't win the fight even though I had like more health and armor, and I didn't feel like I should be out aimed. So it was very difficult, and I hated it, and I was dying to beat him and you know, get that cable connection. But there was a big difference between the online scene in terms of connection that there is now. But what was great about back then was, because of that, they were so hyped for LAN tournaments, and I remember going to like Savlan and winning like the 1v1 RA3 tournament, which was just about aiming, and that was something I could never do online. So it was a great community, a great time, but it was very different to now. Yeah, it's crazy.
It's interesting that you would say that you got picked up just playing Clan Arena, because people probably forget, but Quake 3, probably one of the biggest problems it had was like the default free-for-all mode was just shit and nobody played it. So really Clan Arena was sort of people's equivalent of public if they weren't playing a duel with their team. And plus Clan Arena had the added bonus of being a bit like Counter-Strike. When you're dead, you have to watch the other players, and so you soon figure out who's really good. And obviously if someone like this joins the server, everyone's going to be watching him, and so it's actually a good way for people to show up how good they are. Like, was it just you who came up this way, or did other people come up? Because I mean, I remember part of the problem back then also was you still had the hierarchy of the guys who came from Quake World and stuff, and they like automatically got spots, and it was hard for people to bust their way in, you know.
I don't think there were many people that came up just through Clan Arena, and the only reason I did was because I used to play Mech Commander, which was an RTS game, and it was pretty cool and old, but I found Quake, and while I used to wait for Blunt, who ended up being a pro as well in like 4 Kings for Unreal Tournament, as well as kind of like a Quake 3 pro, but not so much on the dueling scene. CTF, I would say, and then Quake 4, he became a jeweler for a bit, but then he started sucking, so we kicked him. Yeah, but it was like Clan Arena, the only reason I got into it was because my brother's mate saw me playing Quake 3, and I was playing on multiplay in American servers on 350 ping, and then he opened up the console and typed in Jolt Clan Arena and Barry's World Clan Arena server, and so every time I used to come in from school or whatever, like, you know, college, I used to like connect to those 2 IPs, and then I would learn about, you know, IRC server listing. I think it was like all or something, but me and Blunt were probably the only 2 players that came up through Clan Arena, but I know there's been some Swedes that have, you know, pretty much exclusively played Clan Arena. I think Viam, actually, one of the recent players, I've only really seen him in Clan Arena, and then I was like, holy shit, this Viam guy is crazy good, and then he ended up started doing TDM, and he became crazy good there. But no one really took it to like the pro dueling level from Clan Arena. I was the only one, but the only reason I started dueling was because I felt like after Quake 3 and the scene kind of died off, I was too late to duel versus like Socrates and all these people that I would later meet, but then realize, holy shit, you guys have been on the whole tour all this time. And so when Quake 4 came out, I was very dedicated to try and see if I could become one of the top 10 in the world at you know, a game that I thought was really good.
Like, people probably, to set the scene for people, back then, Quake 3, even though the duel aspect of it was a little bit artificial and like how people only really played it for the CPLs and stuff, and then when it went, it gone. But actually the UK and Europe in general had a pretty good TDM scene. Like, there was a lot of people watching matches. People used to even get excited if a UK team could just win the qualifier to go to the Euro Cup, where it had no prize money, and just going to Holland was the prize. Like, that used to be a big deal. People would wait up for that game. And so there was all that excitement about a game that didn't really have much money, and even just like community enjoyment. If you look at Quake now, even the last few years, it was sort of on life support because IEM was paying, and even to the degree that it has TDM now, it doesn't have like the big amount of people around it who aren't even playing in the game or that interested, like what's the next game going on? What do you think, can we ever actually get TDM back as a valid game mode?
I don't think TDM will come back as a valid game mode. The main reason I see that TDM and Quake kind of dispersed was because of game developers. basically what happens is that FPS becomes a very popular game, like a one-off game, and then someone creates another version of it. Maybe it's like a Counter-Strike, then someone creates a Modern Warfare, then someone creates like Call of Duty, and the community just constantly get more and more scattered across the board. So, you know, it just, the community was very central. I mean, you look at Quake World, you know, it was like the only really good, you know, FPS game, and so there were so many TDM teams because it was like one game you could really play competitively online. Now there's so many FPS games, and it's almost a similar thing that could happen to like the MOBA community. For example, you had Dota, then you're gonna have you know, Heroes of New Earth, League of Legends, and then Dota 2. Imagine if there was just one game. If there was just one game, the online scene would be so much more competitive because there'd be so many more teams just trying to get that qualification. Because once you get that qualification into like a Euro Cup or the equivalent today, you have the chance to go to those LAN finals. So I think like the game developers kind of you know, just spread the community, and it's been the same with every game in terms of MMOs had the same thing. Everyone was in World of Warcraft, now you have a bunch of them, and now it's time for MOBA. MOBA is going to be the new one that gets scattered around, because I'm sure in 2 years there's going to be so many more MOBAs. But I don't think there's going to be any problems in terms of the pro level stuff with Internet Extreme Masters, because that's always going to be the bread and butter of competitive gaming. But it's definitely moved away from the online league side of things.
When Quake 1v1 at least was in IEM, it actually seemed like maybe there was some hope for Quake in general, because the way they described their plan was sort of like, okay, we'll have one of each type of game. So okay, we have Quake for our 1v1 FPS, we have Counter-Strike's our team FPS, and then we have another game. So at the time it was like StarCraft 2, now they've kind of replaced Quake with League of Legends. So as a result, it seems like they're getting more and more excited about League of Legends, they're loving the way it's going, they may be even considering more MOBAs. So as a result, do you ever think that kind of, that basic plan, that sounded like it had some value to it, of setting up a show of different types of games? Can Quake ever get back into something, I mean, not necessarily this Quake, but kind of Quake type game ever get back in?
I think I've actually gone to investors meetings, asked for $2.5 million to make the next Quake game. I didn't get it. They wanted to spend $100 million and do an MMO game, and I was like, and I was like, I have no experience here, because I used to work for Stunlock Studios, which made a 3v3 arena game, like a MOBA. So I had about 2 years experience in game development, you know, working with features to make the game competitive. And when I look at the market within esports, I say to myself the same as you should have your 1v1 RTS, that's your StarCraft 2, it's not going anywhere right now, no one's going to challenge it. You've got your team MOBA, it's definitely going to be split between Dota 2 and League of Legends, for two different reasons. Riot are the best developer and publisher, because they actually support the venues and the organizers, knowing that the marketing, you know, is actually really good for their money in support and prize money. Valve, on the other hand, they do a 1.6 million with their team RTS, and basically, you know, the community loves Dota, so that's why Dota 2 is really going to flourish. You've already seen, you know, Join Dota and also the Premier League, some great tournaments already. And then your team FPS team FPS is Counter-Strike. You know, it needs a new face, you know, right now. I mean, and Counter-Strike Go, from the feedback I've heard, might not be the solution. And then the 1v1 FPS, Quake, it's great as a game, people like spectating it, but an esport is only as big as the community that play it. So really, you know, I mean, I think StarCraft 2 probably has about 7 million active users, and we get about 100 to 200,000 at really big events like viewing. I would say 100 to 150,000. League of Legends 32.6 million, and you can hit over 200,000. So you can look at the percent of players to the percent they're going to watch, and so Quake needs a new game that's really core to its mechanics, but also has a lot of competitive features. And as soon as someone makes that game, I swear to God, it will just be like boom, it's going to be everywhere, because everybody enjoys watching it. The pro gamers in it are really promotable, because you notice that even though in League of Legends Hotshot GG is the star of CLG and a little bit of League of Legends community. The StarCraft 2, because it's 1v1, the focus is very much on the player, and that's very good for esports to not just necessarily pick a team, but to pick one player. Because I'm sure some people like CLG because they're a big fan of Hotshot, or Dignitas because of Skara and Voyboy. But I think 1v1 games are really core, and I have a big problem right now because I'm going to be doing some stuff with Quake Live. Basically, I went out to get funding. I want $2.5 million to make a game. Who's not going to give me $2.5 million? I'm so sensible. And I couldn't get it, and I was like, well, I have no choice. I have to wait on id Software to do maybe a Quake 5 or some random developer to come up with a game. But basically, we've got 2 years waiting until something will come out that's worth playing. So I'm putting in some money now to bring Quake Live back to the online scene. And if it goes well and I get support from the Quake Live community and id Software, I can build an extra LAN or two outside of the DreamHacks and the QuakeCon. But the biggest problem I have if I bring back Quake Live as a competitive game from my efforts, not like I'm not going to solve every problem, is that I need the pros to have a reason to train. Because I don't want to see Cooler and Cypher turn up in one of my tournaments and play if it's Cooler and Cypher that don't practice. I want to see Cooler and Cypher at their best. I want to see who's really the best. I want to see Rafa again versus Cypher, and I want to see if Strengths and Killzone can keep improving like they do. So big market. There's a big gap in esports for that 1v1 SPS game. People will love watching it. If I bring back Quake, I hope the community and the pros will get behind my efforts and be happy with being second place to League of Legends, and hopefully hopefully we show people why it was such a great game.
Actually, kind of tagging on to what you said about Quake World before, I had always felt like in terms of Quake, because I saw it with Counter-Strike as well, so I saw the same thing mirrored, where when we went from Quake to Counter-Strike, all the Quake players were moaning like, oh, it's taken over, and they were thinking, oh, what does Counter-Strike do now that we could copy and then we'd be back at number one or whatever? And so the Counter-Strike players do the same thing now with StarCraft 2, and so they have weird ideas like, wait a minute, it's because we don't stream. If we stream, then everyone will do it. But really, it's kind of what you were saying, like, the reason the community was much bigger for Counter-Strike and then Quake backwards is because you have less and less games. So if you think about it, really, someone who did play Quake back in the day, that's really all he had a choice to play. It was the only good game on like TCP/IP. He might have actually played League of Legends or StarCraft 2 if that type of a game had existed. So he would have never been part of your core audience that made you number one anyway. So it might be the case that some of these games not only aren't as popular now, but they never would have been as popular. And so it might not be possible to do anything to make them number one again. It's whether they can have like a valuable place.
I think that's very true at Quake Live, because Quake Live needs some fresh mechanics. Like, Quake Live is a great game, but for a new community, if we never saw Quake Live until a couple months, and we release it now, it's never going to have the buzz with what it's got. We need some really good competitive features. We need ladders, we need tournaments, we need replays, and we need some competitive features, and we need some hooks. When you design games, you talk about hooks as in terms of what's gonna get the players hooked. What's the selling point of the game? And like League of Legends is one of the most well done designed games for its community, because you don't lose gold when you die. The laning phase can be over reasonably quickly. When you fight as a team at the end of the game, you're very much involved in terms of you come together as a team, and you feel like you're part of a team. And then all the abilities are quite low cooldown. There's not much CC compared to other games in the MOBA genre. So the design encourages people to want to play. If you look at HON, people can die instantly. The fights are so quick that sometimes you don't know why you did a mistake, and it doesn't, the design features are very competitive, but it doesn't build the community. So if Quake came out today, it would never be number one. There needs to be a Quake with fresh features, and I'm not sure what id Software are going to do, and I really hope they do great. But at the same time, I personally think that if the Quake community, with some of the expertise of like Fox, and Faz and myself, and then using like members like Noctis, Sturmy, and using these people to actually look at what we could create if we had. I would make a better Quake for competitive gaming, but I would hope that I would learn from League of Legends and from StarCraft and from Bloodline Champions how to open it up to casual gamers that they would want to play it, and that's really where Quake is lacking right now. So I'm almost scared to bring it back because of that reason, because I'm not going to get new players in. What I'm really going to do is I'm going to show everyone else in esports why Quake is still really cool, and hopefully the pro scene play, and we somehow have an activity until the next game comes. But
in terms of Quake actually having, whether or not it's a new game or not, having like a place, like it doesn't have to be number one, but having a place within the competitive community. The thing I always wondered about was, if we do take the metaphor of sports, so we're trying to build up esports in the sense that we've got a whole range of different disciplines here, trying to make Quake number one is like thinking you could make something like into football or something. You're not going to overtake the thing that's got just everyone's played the game, they know the basics, easy to play, hard to master, all these things. But I always thought with Quake, if you do introduce anyone from any game to it, I've very rarely heard people go and, like people who play Quake will say, oh, League of Legends sucks. I've very rarely heard the people from the League of Legends or the other games go, oh, Quake sucks to be shot. They go, oh, this is cool. They enjoy it. So I always felt like with those games, maybe they could have a place like something like snooker or darts or something. They're never going to be huge, and you don't have to play them. That's the key thing. You can see it's. I don't know everything about it. Obviously, as a nobody, when you don't play darts or whatever, you don't know everything about it, but you know for sure something very, very skilled is going on. And if you can get into that, it's so niche, but it can be like its own spectator sport without needing to be played. Could this work for Quake?
Yeah, that's really why Quake has that potential to come back from a spectator side, and that's why I'm introducing Quake on my new studio, the Good Studio, and I'm putting it with the other games, hoping that the League of Legends, the Dota, the StarCraft 2, and the other communities will at least appreciate watching it. But of course, I need the pros to play, good. But you're right. Quake's never going to come back and take the number one spot like football is in Europe. It's going to be, maybe basketball in Europe, or it's going to have a place in the circuit, but it won't have the viewership, but people should still enjoy watching it. So I'm very happy to do some Quake tournaments, Quake show matches, because I enjoy watching it, and I think that the reason that everyone can enjoy watching it is because it was one of the first genres of competitive gaming, the 1v1. People understand the basics, and then they can understand what's going on if the commentator can explain it well enough. And that's sometimes the problem that League of Legends has, because MOBAs are quite new. They're only really appreciated by the community that play MOBA. So it's kind of like American football, for example. I don't understand the rules of American football. I don't play American football, but I can still appreciate the athleticism and the skill involved. But at the same time, it's not on my list of things to do in terms of watch. And I think that so many people around the world have had an experience with a Quake or a Doom or an Unreal tournament, that they've had that experience at school with their mates, and so they can appreciate watching it. So it has that spectator element, and that's probably the biggest reason we can bring it back, not because of the community size.
Obviously, you actually did play Quake 4, and it had its own circuit for a while in like 2006, 2007. But did you ever feel a bit? It felt like the one downside of all the history of Quake, even though it had this long history, was that after it had its little bursts for Quake 3, then it was always just like on life support with tournaments like ESWC and stuff. And it felt. Did you ever feel a bit cheated in the sense we never got to like blow Quake out and see what it could have done? Because I always think, whenever I think of the Painkiller World Tour, I always think if we could have even had that for Quake 3 for 1 year, imagine what like 50k every stop would have done to get like 0-4 playing versus Cooler versus like, we would have never had this problem of like the guys cycling in and out the scene. We could have had everyone got. Did you ever get this sense yourself?
Well, I think back then, back when WSVG was on and I was playing in that in like 2006, 2007, we didn't have streaming platforms. For example, obviously, I work for Twitch TV, so Twitch TV and streaming platforms have really centralized our content to show the world how big competitive gaming esports really are. So I don't think that they could have really justified putting in more money and making it grander than it was, just because of the end user, the viewership that we had was so small compared to what it could be today. So I think if we bring Quake back, we'll probably get more viewers now for Quake, which is funny, just because of all the other communities that will find us, via the streaming platforms. But at the same time, as I said, and I repeat myself, we need an updated version of Quake. We need something a little bit more, up to date, up to tempo.
So then, basically, one thing I wanted to ask about, like, the actual Quake 4 period that you had. I don't want to go super in depth because the problem is, like, a lot of people won't even remember that game, and it was pretty niche even back then for Quake 4. The main thing I wanted to ask actually was, there was a weird period where you finally started to get good, as it were. Like, you started to actually, especially for a UK dueler, you were getting pretty high in the rankings. Like, you were upsetting people who you probably shouldn't have on paper. But then at that exact same period was when you basically, like, quit and said you had, like, RSI issues. And so what I wanted to know was, like, firstly, like, was it the fact that you were you had the problems already, and so that kind of made you go, like, all out to just go, like, fuck it, I've only got a few tournaments left? That kind of what has caused you to have this run at the end? Was it the case that you were getting close there and then you were like, oh fuck, now I have to quit? And was it also the case that kind of your style of play only worked if you used, like, the wrist style of play? You couldn't have gone to, like, the big growing machine style, mousepad style?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. My Quake 4 career, basically, when Quake 4 came out originally, I was really motivated, and I practiced the most. And I had all the members from Demonic Core, like Storm, Abyss, Blunt, and they all had a different style of dueling. So what I did, I would play against all of them, and I would always win, but I would always have to overcome their either defensive or offensive styles. And I trained very hard, and I was very motivated. So I definitely got more practice time in than most other people against a good variety of players. So when I went to DreamHack, I got 3rd place behind toxjq and Fox, and I almost, took a map off, almost took it to an even game, etc. So that was like a really big start for me, and everyone was, like, quite surprised. And then I continued with that kind of momentum, where I was, training, upsetting a few players, and I was definitely, like, feeling quite good about my game, and was training quite enough. And then I'm a big analyst, so I was analyzing lots of different players' styles and lots of different ways that people were optimizing their different weapons based just off their seating style, their mouse, their wrist, or their arm style and everything. And I was looking at that and I was like, oh god, I've kind of set myself up a bit awkwardly here, because I was a very good TDM player, because when you play with wrist only, you often will always look at the directions you want to fight. So you don't have to have such smooth movement, and then in duel it was a lot more on movement, and my movement was actually a lot worse than a lot of the top pro gamers, but I would try and make the best decisions to get the best out of every opportunity, and I was very railgun heavy, which is a point and click, but you always look in the right direction. So I went to Sweden, I trained my LG, I went mental, I was playing with Thuki, I was like, I need to increase it, I was playing with all my stuff, and I kind of, like, felt really that I had achieved, like, a top 8 in dueling, like a top 8 status, maybe not worldwide, but all tournaments I would get, like, top 8, and I wasn't getting top 3, I wasn't winning those big spots, and I was like, if I'm going to win those top 3, I've either got to retrain the way I play and then come back and go shit for literally 3 months or however long it would have taken me. And I did one last push where I was like, alright, let's just see what I can do with what I've got, and I played with Lost Cause a lot, and we trained like 6 hours a day, and that's a lot in Quake because it's quite demanding, and basically I did get RSI. So with RSI, where it used to hurt to drive and do other things, You know, I used to get other people to drive for me and other things. And basically I was like, okay, you know, I was a little bit demotivated, and I used to train 2 hours a day. But I used to train 2 hours a day, and because of my experience, I could still get a good placement. And then basically I was like, well, you know, I didn't quit on it, but I was like, I was more interested in I wasn't interested in doing 12 hours a day to try and get top 3 and relearn the whole game. So I didn't want to do that. And then I was like, well, I'm actually more interested in the business side and the commentary side. And I felt that if I could commentate, I could bring something to the table that not all commentators can bring, which is like a very high-level commentator, being you know, a very high-level commentator who was a very high-level player. Because even Artosis and Day 9, they weren't like internationally, you know, yeah, but in their own countries, and you know, so maybe it's harder in StarCraft because of the amount of competition. But within Quake, I was definitely up there, and I could really read the players well, and I felt like that would promote esports more in the game. And then, yeah, and then basically the transition, and I just fell into different things. But I've always kind of done everything in esports with a passion of I just want esports to grow and you know, give other people the life I had, because I was traveling the world meeting all my, you know, mates and meeting people who are very open-minded and similar-minded, you know, and so it's very easy to get a connection with the esport world in terms of, because they're just so nice, basically. And now I look around and there's so many different people following our footsteps, and it's really the guys back in the Quake and the CS days, you know, that were really the ones that have made that possible.
One guy who, I mean, he's completely faded from the scene, no one even thinks about him anymore, but I wanted to get your take because you're a guy who knew him, and he was kind of a weird guy from a observer's point of view, Ztrider. So this guy, usually when you're the up-and-coming player, if you get any kind of success, you're supposed to go like hell for leather and just be like, I'm going to practice more than that guy, I'm going to beat him, I'm motivated. If you get any success, it seemed like as soon as he got any success, even in Painkiller and then a bit in Quake 4, he would just be like, oh, okay then, I'll play a little bit and maybe I'll be good again. And then he'd like upset someone, then he'd be like, he wouldn't close out the tournament. He was just, what was with this guy?
Ztrider was basically, yeah, so fucking talented. You know, he was so talented. Like, he could beat anybody. Like, he really could beat anybody. But he just never cared if he beat them or not. And the thing is like, it was just his lifestyle, man. It was his life choice. He was like, nah, I don't care. It's like, he was like, I don't want to go to this tournament, Sam. They already booked the flights and everything. And I'm like, dude, you know Sam from Fnatic. We were in Fnatic. He's going to go mental. He's like, nah, don't care. And so, like, I told him, you know, I was like, when he dies, I'm going to get on his tombstone. I'm going to write, here lies Ztrider, blah, 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 dead. He doesn't care. Because he literally was just like that. But he was a super nice kid, you know, but I just don't think he had the motivation to, I mean, basically, like, what people don't see is, like, there's talent and there's dedication, okay? Ztrider, very, very talented. Fatality, very dedicated. Fatality was never the fastest at picking up games, but because of his dedication, he really got to one of the best out there. Ztrider was super talented, but then super didn't care and lazy, that he would never be able to put himself in that position where he was in the CPL finals versus Vu, but he could have, because he was good enough. And I think dedication will always take you further in life and esports than talent, because I always, like, at the start of Quake 4, I was like a lot more talented than most of the players that I would end up losing to 6 months, 12 months down the line, just because of dedication. I mean, Fatality, he played me and beat me, you know, and I was like, I just felt like, I was like, yeah, I could, you know, give me a new game and we'll both play it and I'll learn it faster than you. But at the time I played him, he was like, his dedication and his training regime just made him run the map, and I was just like, oh, okay. And it's like the Koreans in StarCraft 2. Like, apparently I spoke to the translator here, and I'm like, what do the Koreans think about the StarCraft 2 European and American scene when they watch him play? It's like, do they laugh sometimes, or do they go, not really, but sometimes, because they watch him play and they know every single timing. They know at like 6 minutes there's going to be a ban sheet coming, and they see the European or the American player playing, and he's not preparing for that timing. And it's just because the Koreans, you know, they're not like magical or something. They're just so much more dedicated, and which is why I really like esports, because talent is a small percent of it. Dedication dedication is really a larger percent. So that's why we can see like champions from any country, but they have to have the mindset and the ability to be the most dedicated to win. For example, Rafa, so dedicated, and you know, you normally don't see America produce the best Quake players. You know, it's mostly the Europeans, but he was so dedicated that he took it, you know, and he took the game to like a new level in terms of strategy, you know, and winning for SK Gaming just did amazing. And I think that like Fatality did that a little bit back when he was there, and I really think that when we get a European player or American player like take it as seriously as the Korean StarCraft 2, you know, they're going to be just as good. My favorites right now are actually Naniwa, because he is, you know, he has that kind of mentality, and Grubby as well, but he has a lot of promotional stuff that he has to do. But you can, like Team Dignitas, and I'm sure Alex from SK, they do pick a lot of players based off not how skillful they are now, but really their dedication. So basically, yeah, dedication is the way forward. But that was a long answer to a simple question. But it's true. It's true.
An interesting thing that I think we learned from, I mean, a good example would be Fatality and from Toxic as well, is that there used to be this myth. I mean, it made sense on one level. People always said in games like the only way to get better or to practice is you have to always practice with someone better than you, and then that's how you always get better. And obviously, to a degree, there's a truth to that. But I remember when Toxic was having this straight, he would even say like his practice would be he would get like a mid-level opponent, and he would sort of like not play to their level. He would sort of do what he was going to do anyway, and just sort of use them as like, I guess almost like sort of like a punching bag or something. Whatever he was doing. And Fatality also did the same thing. He basically took a guy on who wasn't good enough to be like top 10 or something, but just sort of to be his punching bag all the time, so he could play him anytime. And so the idea was more like, I guess it's like the guys who think you had to play someone better maybe didn't have internal motivation or something, and they needed it to be like given to them outside by being forced to get up to that level. But it sounded like the really good players kind of, they could do it even against the guys who weren't as good, you know. What do you think about that concept?
That is the strategy of learning the game. Learn to beat the game rather than learn to beat the player. For example, if I'm playing Toxic and he's got this armor, that mega, he knows that yellow armor's here and he's in this position, and he's been in this position 1,000, 10,000 times because he's played so many people, and I spawn on the other side of the map, and he probably knows that because where he's killed me, and I've got a machine gun. How am I different from his low-level practice partner? I'm not, because if he plays it perfectly from that position, I'm just as easy to kill. So basically, Toxic took these low-level players, and he learned how to control the map against all spawns, against all opposition, and learn how to really get the most out of every single weapon. Admittedly, the guy couldn't defend himself as well, but at the same time, if you're in that much control, if you've got that much dominance in terms of map presence, you know, maybe no one could. But you know, so that was like a style where you beat the game, and then you know, the player. And obviously, he had a lot of experience against top players and knew they were going to be very sneaky, and you know, he would have to adjust. But the same with Fatality. Fatality, when you play him, he didn't beat you. He beat the game. He beat the map that you were on. And he had a very similar style. But the difference between those two was Toxic was more talented as a player, and the way more talented as an aimer. So when we saw Toxic versus Fatality in the finals, it was like, I think Toxic put him on minus score because they both had the same kind of training regime, but Fatality couldn't match up to Toxic. So it was just, but someone like Cooler, someone who didn't want to just play the map and really put a lot of focus on the player and you know, like really kind of mind games, Cooler would have had a way better finals versus Toxic than Fatality. Yeah, but that was a weird finals for WSVG.
Actually, I have a question for you about that final, because you know there's a conspiracy theory has always existed on ES Reality that said that whole final was actually fake, and that since Toxic was so good in Fatality, I mean, everyone was rewriting the story of Painkiller, like, oh, he came back and he was able to compete with the best guy. People think that because the first set that he played against Toxic he won in like a weird way, then Toxic just smashed him in the second one. They think that the organizers of WSVG or someone someone went to the guy, Toxic, and said, listen, you're going to win anyway, dude. So if you can let Fatality win the first set, it's going to be a really good story, and we're going to blow it all up. Next season, it'll all be great. You know, can you do that? And it was just when he joined like the Fatality organization. Since you're not involved in this anymore, what can you tell me?
Honestly, I can tell you that I believe that Fatality was meant to win that finals. We had a meeting with Toxic, with Fnatic, to join us, and we had a nice meeting with me, Sam, and Toxic, and I was in Fnatic at the time, and then he was like, yeah, I've got a meeting with the Fatality brand now, the day before the finals. So he went to the hotel room, met all the Fatality brand and all the company the day before the big finals. We turn up to the finals, and Fox told me that Toxic actually did change his mouse sensitivity just for the finals, right? And I'm like, what? I'm in the crowd with Fox, and I'm like, why would he do that? And he's just like, I don't know. He's, you know, so maybe he was just really bad the first game because he changed his mouse sensitivity. But we were watching it. I was watching it, and I was just like, what is going on? I was like, this is not humanly possible. Like this is not Toxic. So the first best of 3, Fatality stomped him. Really stomped him. Like, and I was just like, I was in disbelief, and I thought, well, maybe because all the Americans in the audience, and it was very Fatality kind of supportive, were cheering for every Fatality frag, and maybe it got to Toxic. You know, maybe Toxic was like, you know. So when the game finished, the first game, Leafy was sat next to me, and she said, James, do something about it. You know, you're his friend. And so I kind of like, while the camera was still on, I was like, shouted, you know, Johan. I was like, everybody in this room is either a supporter or even a partner of Fatality and want him to win. That's 500 people. I said, everybody on the internet, on ES Reality, you know, who love Quake, they want you to win because, you know, and I said, stop playing his game and start playing your game, because basically it looked like Fatality was setting the pace, and winning a Quake game, you really have to control the map and set the pace of the game. If you want it slow and you're a better player, the map slows down. If you want it fast and you're a better player, the map speeds up. Or the game speeds up. And then everyone was like, I got quite famous in that moment because no one really knew me so much. And they were like, oh, the too good guy, you know, whatever. And then the next match, Toxic absolutely destroyed him so bad that I remember thinking to him, I shouted out, like, stick him on minus, because it was like so easy to do. And I remember before I said that little speech in the halftime thing, Fatality's manager goes, and now a message from the BBC, you know, and everyone laughed. But when Toxic played, and he was fragging, no one in the audience was cheering. And then all of a sudden Toxic types in chat going, rather quiet in here, isn't it? And then everyone like started cheering. But I can't see why, from one game to the next, there would be that much difference between 2 top pros. And it's not like they had to train all year, so their level should have been very similar from game to game. And they even played the same maps the next game, and it was rigged. I asked Johan about this, Toxic, and he had no comment, right? So in my mind, there's no answer to it at the moment. But I personally think that for esports and the Fatality brand, and I think it would have been better for esports had Fatality won, because he would have promoted esports, you know, in a bigger way than Toxic, who just said, oh, I'm going to go and bet on horses with my father because that's what he does now. You know, it would have been better for esports, and I think they looked at that as it's good for esports, it's good for our brand, and I do think that they, you know, I think there was something there. But I think Johan, if he did change his mind halfway through, I hope I convinced him a little bit to go, screw it, mate, whatever million, you know, just take the 10 grand and the Rolex. But who knows, because at the same time he changed his mouse sensitivity, so he could have just really played bad. It's a very interesting moment in esports, definitely.
In terms of the discussion we were having earlier about like fracturing of the scene, different games coming along that maybe the older people don't like, but they're kind of like the future, it's always seemed like a problem is when you've only played one game and it was your first game and you really loved it, it's like you had an overflowing abundance of like how fun it was and everything was so awesome, and it might even have been a better game. And then what happens is when you move to the next game, if you're lucky, you can find something else about it, maybe one thing, like you wouldn't key in on it, like, oh, okay, I'm actually into that thing, I can still enjoy it somehow. But because these games are to some degree watered down, or let's just say they're more for the casual player or whatever, it's almost like you have to take that little drop you've got there and squeeze everything you can out of it, instead of before you could just enjoy everything about it. It's like every game feels like it gets a little bit more. Does that concern you at all?
Yeah, it does, definitely. I think with, like, for example, League of Legends, it's a softer version of Dota. You know, it definitely is an easier version, but I can't say for sure because I've never played it on the pro level. But from my experience in watching it, and I spoke to Skara from Dignitas, and he used to play Hon at a very high level, and you know, he kind of, you know, somewhat agreed, but I don't really know to what extent. You know, he was like, yeah, it felt like Hon was what I loved playing, but I couldn't get in. He said he couldn't get in any of the top teams for Hon because it was a very private circle, and then League of Legends, because of the ladder system, he could get noticed. And I feel like for the League of Legends community, because it's casual and the guys coming in haven't played like a Quake or whatever, this for them is the height of their competitive enjoyment, and they love it. Someone coming from like a Dota who plays League of Legends doesn't get the experience, doesn't get the challenge, the mental challenge, or the stimulation, you know, that he would necessarily want. So it's definitely concerning where esport games may go in terms of what will be competitive. But I definitely think there's room for a casual introduction to a way to get people in casually, and then give them the high-level game mechanics that really are the big hooks and the big reasons that you love it. Because like Fox, for example, we're both Quake players, and we love like spatial awareness games. We used to love playing like team games more than 1v1 because you have to think about all the what's going on around you. He loves his Heroes of Newer just because it's like a similar thing for him, you know. And I got him into like Dota 2, and he hated the slow movement speed or turn speed, but that was like a copy from the Dota engine. And then League of Legends, you know, he despised. Oh, Mr. ESL, Ralph. So it doesn't concern me because I think the community will generally dictate what games will be picked. I think League of Legends is one of the games that wasn't necessarily picked. It was kind of like a new strategy for an esport game to use esports as a marketing tool, but the game was good enough competitively and had a tremendous player base that it does deserve its spot. I think if we opened up esports and said anyone who's got an average competitive game that wants to pay us money to bring it in, we'd just be a joke community. But I'm very excited that League of Legends is actually in, because it's a huge influx. It's like our starter game. Honestly, if you want to be a pro gamer at any game, don't play Quake. It's going to take you 3 years to only find out you're still getting your ass kicked. Counter-Strike, how the hell are you going to beat any of the top teams and be as good, you know, and it's like Dota 2, that is very, you know, it's very difficult, and also a smaller community, so it's like it's harder to get in. And then like League of Legends, you can breeze up to the top. You can breeze up past the bottom tier and the mid tier to get close to the top tier so quickly because of the size of the player base, and you know, thereon you can really work with it. So I'm really happy that League of Legends is like an intro game to competitive gaming, and I'm not worried about the dumbing down of games because the community will really pick.
Without this sounding like a softball, because I mean, well, I'll just say it as it is. When you left ESL and stopped doing Quake 3 with them, well, Quake Live, people said like, oh, why would you do that? You know, he was the best Quake Live guy, we all loved him, he liked to play Quake, etc. And it seemed like a bit of a gambit at the time, like you thought maybe if Quake kept going, then you'd come back in better conditions or something. But instead, you've obviously never come back to Quake at ESL, and actually Quake's gone now from IEM. And so from that sense, was it that you actually could see kind of, this doesn't really have a future beyond a certain amount of time, so I don't want to just only do this at this level and like hit a plateau? Or were you actually literally just kind of trying something out and like it didn't necessarily go in that direction, you were like still searching for where you were going?
When I was at ESL-TV, I came as a Quake and World of Warcraft commentator, and over the time I was being asked to do Trackmania, Counter-Strike, go to cosplay conventions, talk about laptops, and I was like, well, if you brought me in to do this and I'm having to do this, you're obviously not making a successful business model off what you've employed me to do. And so it felt like, because I was having to branch off and do multiple different things around my expertise, that it didn't feel like back then it was going to be sustainable. And I had some inkling in terms of, you know, I always get a little bit of information early, and I was like, okay, this doesn't look as good for, you know, Quake, etc. So basically, I just felt that back then, without having the big streams and whatever, esports was a little bit of a charity. I mean, the Intel Extreme Masters, you know, a lot of it is about Intel. You know what I mean? I don't know how many more cells Quake get if they're in the Intel Extreme Masters. You know, how more active is the community? You know, I don't have those statistics. So I don't think that Intel and, you know, the business behind it, you know, minded much that there was going to be a different and bigger game. I think the Intel Extreme Masters, because it is that esports tournament, but also within the esports tournament at all the biggest trade fairs, is always going to want to have the biggest. I think stuff like DreamHack, you know, where you've got a really core audience and, you know, they can pick up the games that people want to see or, you know, love to see, because they do drive their business differently from the Intel Extreme Masters or from ESL. So yeah, I just felt like it wasn't going exactly where I wanted it to, and I wanted to make a game. I wanted to make Bloodline Champions. Awesome.
Tagging on to what we were saying before about games getting dumbed down a little bit, or perhaps to make them appeal to more people, you have to either reduce difficult elements and leave skill in there in some way, but more limited or specialized, simpler in some way. For me, I'm guessing maybe for you, if you take aside like your promotional work or your work where you're trying to kind of be like a branch between the hardcore and the casual guys, if you were just a player and I was just a player, maybe you'd have a similar mentality to me, where like I always think of Quake World and stuff, and the reason why I love that game is because I'm not good at it. Like, I was good, but I was never like the best, and the fact that I wasn't the best was evident if I played someone even a tiny notch above me, because in that game, a tiny notch above me is like getting shit on by the best. It may as well be the best player in the world I'm playing. So every time I play someone better, that's like what the casual gamer always complains about. He hates that and it puts him off the game. But for me, it means that, like, as weird as it sounds, it works in reverse, because when I'm getting beaten up by them, I think like, yeah, but every time I get beaten up and I close the gap, now when I play the guy below me, I'm gonna like smash him. So as a result, I know like all my wins are legit as much as you can. I know like I didn't flukily beat another guy. It's like it keeps your ego in check, and and allows it to grow in like a healthy way. Like, I deserve to be better. So I wanted to know, even in the MOBA world, you come from World of Warcraft and stuff where it was like 3-on-3, and these things are like, you can see the lineage going down where like this team would say this fucking sucks compared, etc., etc. So here's the analogy I wanted to make. The reason why I worry about guys like you and me, if there's going to be a game for us eventually, like what we could ever play in esports, is because if you look at a real sport, even as a physical sport, the actual difference in gap of skill, etc., is pretty negligible, even for a physical sport like basketball, for example. Even though it looks like the gap is huge between the guys who win like all the championships and the guys who don't, compared to me and you, it's like negligible, the gap. And so the trick of sports is we only take the absolute top 1%, then we stretch that out so the entire scope of the sport is just the 1%. So then it does look huge between the last guy and the top guy, even though the last guy's really, really, really good. And so the problem with the casual games, I sometimes wonder, is if, like, I've heard Carmack, for example, not to throw him under the bus, say that a problem with games like Quake and Counter-Strike, and he says it's because of the community, is that you can't have a new pro player who like dazzles the scene every 12 months. Whereas I wonder, because in something like a sport like basketball, I doubt you could have someone come in within even a couple of years and become like straight to the top. It would not be similar to how it is now. Like, the guys who are on top for a reason. So how do you, like, I mean, this is like an open topic you can go with, but how do you kind of see this weird balance we're trying to get there?
Well, yeah, that's a lot on game design, but I'm similar to you. I appreciate a game where the guy who's 1% better than me could make me look like a nobody, and, you know, I appreciate that. Like, me as a competitive gamer, when I lose that game, I appreciate the game being that demanding on skill at every moment, that it entices me and encourages me and motivates me to want to play more, because you want to see what you're capable of, you know. And so those kind of games like Quake, you know, and like Counter-Strike really have so much freedom for the player to express how good they are as a player in terms of their personality, their skill set, and the more you can express yourself in a game, I think the better the game is. So I still rank Quake up there as one of the best ones. And then you look at like games like World of Warcraft, where you said originally World of Warcraft was very difficult. It was a huge amount of options in terms of how to play your class, and because with every option there is always a mistake potential. So the amount of mistakes you could make in a World of Warcraft 3v3 game was monumentally high. That the players got so good that they were really, like, the pro players were so far apart from the scene just below them, because they were making as minimal amount of mistakes as possible, and because of that they were dominating, they were destroying. And then World of Warcraft decided, oh, we're going to be a bit more casual now, and they made like priests easier to play. And so everybody that wasn't as good as Hydra from like Team Dignitas and etc. ended up catching up to him, because they took away some of the skill elements and some of the difficulty, that opened it up to a larger casual base. And obviously with the ability to bring people up quicker to that pro level, because of its learning curve, yeah, you get a larger scene like League of Legends. But at the same time, League of Legends probably isn't as praised much. I mean, there really is a pecking order in MOBAs. You know, you play Dota, you play Dota 2, and if you're shit, they go tell you to play Heroes of New Earth, and then you go play Heroes of New Earth, and if you're shit, you know, and people don't like you in your team, they go play LoL. That's really what they say. Like, no one tells you that you're rubbish at League of Legends, go play Dota. But at the same time, it's like a balance between what the community in esports needs against what we should respect as our core fundamentals of what is an esport game. And I personally, because I don't have a financial problem in terms of, oh shit, if I don't get money for my next tour that costs millions because my games aren't big enough in audience, I'm out of a business. I don't have that. So when I've done my studio, I've concentrated on what I think are the most skillful esport games of their elements that I can commentate. So I've got Quake for 1v1, I've got StarCraft 2 for 1v1 RTS, even though I will say that Brood War is harder, but at the same time it's you have to it's a choice between getting behind the one that you think is going to be worth watching. Then I've got Bloodline Champions for Arena MOBA rather than World of Warcraft, because Bloodline Champions is a lot more skill based but it doesn't have as big community, obviously. I'll maybe get 1,000 to 2,000 people watching Bloodline Champions at World of Warcraft Arena tournaments. They just happened with VHL. They got like 10 to 20,000, you know. And then I picked Dota 2. And I picked Dota 2 because I just felt like, you know, I don't think, you know, I could associate myself as a League of Legends commentator because of how I view esports in its core mentality. But I still think of League of Legends, you know, as good, but, you know, for me it's a stepping stone into esports. I mean, you know, it's not a bad thing. It's really not a bad thing. But for me, if I was to commission every esport game, you know, I would probably upset some people by saying what can and can't be an esport. But I love the harder games. But there's so much going on in esports, there's room for all of them to have a place. Because, for example, Battlefield, you know, it's a great game. It's not in a pro circuit, but there's no reason why it shouldn't have an online league and tournament and maybe a LAN finals at DreamHack every once in a while or something like that, you know, who knows. So I would never say that something shouldn't be an esport, because all games are competitive, but I can see, I mean, I can see why these guys love that game to a competitive level, because it's their first one, a lot of them, and I can see why people would never take a step back, because once you've had it like as hardcore and as you know, you don't normally want something a little bit less, or at least, you know, that's how my sex life is anyway.
One thing that I've never heard this actually addressed by anyone like in tournaments or game design, which is the element of changing games rapidly. I mean, people have said a really obvious thing like, oh, Battlefield or whatever changes every year, but no one's bothered to mention that all of our favorite esports games, so like the ones that people really got fanatical about, like Brood War, Quake Live or Quake 3, similar enough versions, Counter-Strike obviously, a big part of what made these games, at least from my perspective, like allowed you to have cool games and then add on like our own sporting history type element, like you would in a real sport like football or something, is that the games stopped being developed at a point, and then we basically had the same game for the most part for like 10 years, say. And so it meant that if I did see Cypher change the game and do some insane shit, the reason I knew it was insane at a core level is because I knew, 0-4 couldn't do that in his era. And so that's why it was like a stepping stone. Whereas even in StarCraft 2, and I've noticed this is the general trend in all the games, because the developer wants to be so hands-on, you get this weird scenario where I could say to you, for example, like, such and such a player was good like a few months ago, why isn't he anymore? And then someone would say, well, I mean, Terran was a little bit imba and they used to be able to do this, but like if you could do that for Quake, the cool history element, it wouldn't really, do you see what I mean? It wouldn't really be there as much.
And that's a really good design element for an esport game, okay? For example, Quake. All the weapons do the same damage. All the maps are pretty much the same, but they all have the same items on them, right? There's very little balance changes, and so when you, as you said, when you watch some guy develop and the matches with the same players from 5 years ago to present day, they're so different. They've evolved as players and they've pushed each other up, but the game has stayed the same, and that's a real involvement. That's a real history, and that's possible in Quake because of the type of game it is. It's a 1v1 FPS game, StarCraft 2, very, very difficult. I mean, same with World of Warcraft. It's because, the developer wants to improve the game, and by doing so, sure, different periods of time, I remember someone said to me about Grubby. He said Grubby's like one of Blizzard's favorite people, right? Because he's so great. But they also said that because he plays Orc, he gives a lot of feedback around Orc, and apparently there's one patch where basically like there was like 9 undead pro players that couldn't beat him anymore, and they ended up just leaving the game. And he said it to me in a jokingly way, but like there's an element of truth behind it. Not that like that about Grubby, but just how different patches can change why players are good or bad. And that does sometimes take away from the spectator kind of, or the fan pleasure of your guy winning, because you may feel that like, oh, okay, it's favorable now, but it also adds to the element that when someone is not favored, that they can win. So I just think that if I was to design around the FPS esport games, they're always going to be like this. And with RTS, where there's numbers involved, patches and balances, where the game can't be even, where I'm a different class to you, where it can't be even, it's always going to have to evolve as a game. So it's not a problem, but I can understand why it's not. I mean, it's not as sometimes cool, but at the same time, as a business model goes, if Blizzard didn't update their game and release a new patch, they wouldn't make money from the communities coming in, and then esports might have had a smaller like StarCraft 2 should be here for 5 years minimum, right? But if it wasn't getting updated and there wasn't new patches, it would go away maybe in 3-4 years, and people would go, oh, it's not as good as Brood War, let's go back. And then but because it evolves and changes and new patches come out, it's probably got a 10-year lifespan, to be honest. I can't see anything really taking over StarCraft 2 anytime soon, but 10 years is quite optimistic, but with a few patches, who knows?
Because actually another thing that I wanted to tag on to was, a problem is sometimes I feel like the most casual viewer, people want to cater to them too much. Like it's good to include them and to give them something cool to like latch onto. Like if you get a little bit more interested, then we've got like some more cool content for you. But if you dumb it down to the lowest level, then you're going to kind of piss off the guys who like the hardcore stuff. And so from my perspective, I always thought the problem is, it seems like the most casual fan like likes games. He likes the game itself, but he also likes the WWE element. So, you know, he wants to see another guy win the belt this time. That'll be more cool. Like, oh, it's shocking that this guy won the belt and he's the champion now. I don't want to see one guy be the champion for like 50 pay-per-views in a row. And to give this example for WWE, and so you have to have your storylines and then one guy lose. But really, yeah, it is bad if your scene is so small that one guy wins all the time. But in an ideal world, if the game was so good that the best player was winning most of the time, yeah, sure, we want a good player who's better to come along and win. But if one player is legitimately like a genius, we want him to win all the time, surely.
That's true. In Quake, Quake 4, Toxic won everything because he was legitimately the best, and there was no patch that was ever going to come around and knock him out. People had to catch up with him, and if you're the best in your game, you should pretty much win. Like, if the game is so good, like you say, you should win for a whole year straight until someone was able to really catch you up. But of course, as you said, the WWE element, you know, the best thing about like StarCraft 2, there can be multiple different people that can win. Well, admittedly, the scene's a lot bigger, so the chances are, you know, we had more in Quake, you know, there might have not been, you know, but there's no one who's really reigned supreme. There's no one who, there are a few who obviously stand out, you know, MMA is doing fantastic right now, Don Regu's up and coming, but then maybe Zerg, you know, with, you know, is a little bit there, and then you got Nestea, and then if you look at the GSL, how many different champions rotate, it does make it very interesting, but then it does take away a little bit from, I think, the win compared to if they were in a game where it was like Quake and, you know, where Rafa had his whole year, and, you know, I think that was amazing. So it's an interesting point, but in terms of like, does that affect the viewership or the audience? I don't think so. I don't think the casual gamers necessarily mind if it's the same champion or someone else, because the story, as long as the story is told in a good way, and that's something that commentators don't do enough, is really tell a story. You know, and it's like, there's a few that do it, but really you want to, I think the casual gamers will be more interested in the tournaments if they knew a little bit more background of the players and their training and their rivals and then tell the story of him, and then you don't necessarily have to be connected to the game. You can understand the RTS of StarCraft 2 because everyone's played like Command & Conquer, but you're connected to the player, and really that will, you know, people are the most interesting thing, you know, in the world anyway, you know, and single malt whiskies, but it's kind of like, you know, the attachment to the player and the way that we present our players, that's really where the casuals should get their enjoyment, and the guys that are really like loving the game and loving they're just going to get more enjoyment because they really understand the game. So I think I think StarCraft 2, Blizzard, you know, all the guys that have been behind the StarCraft 2 community have made a great job of telling the story about these gamers. We know a lot about the StarCraft 2 community. I don't know so much about the League of Legends guys. They kind of promote themselves naturally by streaming right now. You can get personal with the League of Legends community from the streaming side, but the community, you know, like Team Liquids and the interviews you do, they really show us why we're so passionate about the StarCraft side of things. So I'm okay if the winners change in the different types of games, but I would rather the community, I would rather the story be told a little bit better.
With like discussion of like whether there's a bubble and all that stuff aside, another thing that seems to be actually a really bad problem. It's one of those problems where it's like a problem that's born out of things that are good, so it's like a good problem to have. There's too many tournaments and there's no stratification to them. We had this to some degree in other games, so the difference is there was still few enough, like maybe 10 a year, that the people who were on the inside really knew, most people kind of knew which the ones you were supposed to win if you were the great player was. In games like StarCraft 2, you get this real problem where every weekend there is some sort of tournament, and now it's getting so that there might be a tournament where, for example, MLG in terms of the player base and prestige might have been a really prestigious event last year when it had 5 grand first place. Then you'd have some weird like Scan invitational tournament that would be like 5,000 euros for like 8 players. That's like more than the MLG technology first prize. So if you're a noob, like aside from a commentator telling you, how are you really supposed to know which am I going to watch? Because you can't watch everything. And in a real sport, if you think about it, the thing that makes the big tournament the one you have to win is because there's not another one in 2 weeks that you can just win and makes up for you losing it, you know.
One of the best things about esports is that anyone can be the best at what they want to be very quickly outside of playing. So for example, tournament organizers, NASL Season 2, not so great, right? They got Season 3 coming up. All we know, after Season 3, they can be the best tournament, you know, because it changes so quickly. And you got Iron Squid and then online stuff like Scan Invitationals. So it poses a problem that no one, I mean, it's not really a problem, but no one has a sure foothold on what is the most prestigious event to be in. And that's good for esports, I think, with the competitive side of things. But at the same time, because everyone can, we do have a little bit of saturation, and sometimes the online side of tournaments, or sometimes even the LANs, do get a little bit lost. I think right now, what esports has managed to do in terms of its growth, I think the growth is great. I just think it needs more structure and understanding from an outside looking in. I mean, Twitch TV, for example, they really need a schedule of different tournaments. You know, like, so we can see what's coming up, and obviously the ones that get the more promotion, or you know, the community is decided are bigger. You know, we need to run adverts for Intel Extreme Masters, MLG, DreamHacks on Twitch TV. You know, while the people stream. You know, when they do an advert to get people to come back and really get the community excited about that event. But it's hard to pick who and why, I guess, because obviously other people will be mad if you don't choose to advertise them. But we don't have a governing body. You know, we don't have anybody that is saying that, okay, here is the StarCraft 2 yearly tour. We're gonna connect them all together. Each stop you go to, you'll get points, and then there'll be big finals at the end. So each one is like a championship, and then there's a world final. We don't have anyone doing that, so they're really competitive. You know, the organizers against each other. And now, interestingly enough, you know, like Blizzard are getting involved. They're not doing BlizzCon this year; they're doing theirs. So is that now the most prestigious? I guess it is in a way, because you know it's the Blizzard one. It's the it's the guys who make the game. So yeah, I'm not sure where it's going to go. But esports needs more structure right now, and it needs to, and we need to. It's not like, it's funny because the reason it's grown so big is because of the amount of content, and people always say content is king. All right, it's not. Content is not king. Directed content is king. Taking the viewer experience and helping them find what they want to watch. Because right now we're just throwing out tournaments, and it's great content, but the viewer's not finding where we're not helping the viewer get to where they want to be. And I think esports needs to help structure its yearly program, and Twitch TV needs to help structure so that the new casual guys coming in, you know, really understand and get to follow which tournaments they want to, which tournaments they can miss, and still have a great experience, because you can't watch everything. So yeah, directed content helping people.
That's actually something I want to touch on, what you said about the idea of a tour, because earlier on in when we had this same problem in other games before, obviously, I mean, to use the Fatality example, basically organizations themselves, everyone wanted to say like, this is the world champion who just won our tournament, and it's like, we can even accept that you could have 4 world championships in a year, but if someone could win 10 world championships in a year, it kind of makes it like a redundant even title to have. And Fatality is obviously the funniest example, when he'll just list it like a LAN as a world championship. Well, on that topic, it's like, obviously that's a big problem for StarCraft 2 with so many tournaments. Could we not have, I mean, like you're saying, you need a governing body, but could we not have something maybe like tennis, where they don't have to say like, our event is the real world champion? They have like 4, and they say these are different in their own way.
Yeah, when I designed some tours that I tried to get off to help Bloodline champions, and I even spoke to some different companies like Heroes, S2 Games, you know, and kind of showed them what I was thinking. And basically what I wanted was each stop to be a championship, and then worth points. But I did have that final stop. So it's, I don't know how to go about it. I mean, with games where there's so many tournament organizers, but I love the idea of maybe not being a world champion, but being the this champion, the DreamHack champion, and then the DreamHack reigning champion. But maybe based off how many points you won over the year, if there was a list in terms of points, seedings, and then maybe you could be the world champion just by being blah blah having the most points. But then you have the argument against, well, you entered more tournaments, but and so you would have to schedule them so there was no overlaps. I don't know, yeah, it was weird that there were so many world champions. I think I was like a UK champion a few times in 1 year. It's like 2 times UK champion, 2000 and whatever it was. Yeah, but it was odd. And they all say it as well, don't they? They was like,
I mean, the thing is, it kind of leads into this other topic I want to talk about, you especially, because of like your personality is quite an open one, like you'll be quite frank to a degree, and obviously in terms of as a commentator, you were quite good at being like accurate while still being informative and entertaining. Like you didn't have to just like sell people fake hype all the time. And this is something I want to bring up, because one thing I worry about when I see StarCraft 2, and a lot of the people who are even really, really good at their job, like really good commentators, there's a mentality. I mean, you know, like you're killing esports if you do anything negative, basically, or critical. That's what someone will say. And so there's this mentality that, like, for esports to get big, we all have to pretend nothing's wrong, pump everyone up, and as a result, we're all going to be off great. But it means that you get games where people, you can't even tell if you're a complete nobody who knows nothing. You hear that, like, okay, Kiwikaki's a great player, and so is MVP. So then he's thinking, oh well, this is going to be a close game. But in reality, like, there's a league between these guys. Like, there's a big notch. And so unless you're willing to say at some point, in comparison to MVP, so I'm just using Kiwikaki as an example, in comparison, he's obviously not good just when we're talking about related in the top tier, but no one will dare say that, well, at least from what I've noticed.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I mean, I do believe that the hype of esports and the way that people were trying to hype esports all came around in the day where we had to sell what we were doing to the community, to the sponsors specifically, and we were overhyping. And I know people were giving bullshit fucking reports in terms of like the size. No offense, right? You know, I mean, I've seen MLG's statistics, but I don't actually know how many people watch. But I'm just like, how do these people have this many and you have 2.5 times as many as them? Like, where are you finding this StarCraft 2 community that we don't know? But maybe MLG just, they're so good at in their promotion in America, and America's a really big StarCraft 2 tour, that is true. But I don't have the statistics, so I'm just like, oh, are they selling this up still? But in the day, everyone was overselling esports to be bigger than it was, and this was terrible for us, because what happened was people ended up getting those reports and then ended up looking in closer and ended up being disappointed and would remove their money, because esports was asking for more money than maybe it deserved to sustain itself. So esports for a long time wasn't a sustainable business model, in terms of no one was really making any money. We were all doing it and it was all awesome, but now it is. We don't have to hype up anymore in terms of like to sponsors. For example, I meet a lot of sponsors and I say, like, look at these viewers and how much that would cost you to get this advertisement to an esport community, and then look how much you're paying to get this advertisement in a magazine. And they're like, holy shit. So in reality, the money that's coming into esports right now is a lot smaller than the size. And that's the first time it's actually been that way. Esports has always taken more money than the size of the community. Now, the community, because of all the technologies we have with streaming platforms and Twitch TV, or the communities out there, SK Gaming, or the organizers, esports is actually taking less money from the sponsors. So the hype side of that that can now become realistic. We can say this is this, and actually we still have a little bit of stigma around gaming where they're not willing to put in that kind of money into our entertainment industry, even though it's bigger than fucking Hollywood, than they would into like F1 racing. So now it's okay there, but also from an entertainment level, when you talk about commentators, I hear so many bloody times that was the best move this tournament. Like I'm like, yeah, and I'm like, guys, tell it how it is, because if you tell me, as your example was, they're both great players, if I got told that Kiwi Kaki is probably going to get have such a low chance of winning, I would actually get behind him and be like, I want to see him win, because for me that's like, yeah, give us an upset, and it doesn't have to change the way the commentators are when they hype and do it, because you talk about commentators in the sense that they're always overhyping. I mean, I don't see that so much, but I think that esports is not always about the game itself, but a lot about the entertainment value that we bring as commentators to the audience. So I do believe that some of the commentators want to try and get people to feel there's a lot of hype there, when maybe, because maybe of the casual gamers like you mentioned, so they get, oh, it's exciting. In reality, maybe they're worried that people just won't appreciate a game that's a blowout. But at the same time, when you're in a big tournament, there's X amount of games, not everyone's going to be spectacular. But I would rather commentators just tell it how it is, be very, I like the analytical side, I don't like dumbing things down. I believe that if I'm a casual guy and I watch a commentator and I don't understand everything he says, I actually want to learn. And then I do believe that the entertainment side of our industry hasn't even kicked off yet. I think that in terms of what MTV did for music, in terms of the entertainment around, just in terms of how big it got and how much it grew, I think that all the content producers out there now really have a unique chance to turn video gaming and video game culture into something so big that I don't even know how it could be. And so I think people do need to concentrate on the entertainment side of their shows, but they don't need to bring the hype every time, because if you bring the hype every time, it saturates the hype, similar to too many StarCraft 2 tournaments.
Okay, to close things up, I wanted to do a hypothetical question. Since your wrist's knackered, aliens come to Earth and they say listen, you're obviously an inferior species, we're going to have to wipe you out unless you can show us that you're meaningful as a race, because we've seen your wars and famine and hunger, we can't really see what you're good at as a race, but we really love games and we notice that you like to play games too. So what'll happen is we're going to pick you too good. We've x-rayed your wrist, it's fucked beyond belief, you cannot play anymore, but I want you to be the coach and I want you to pick the best and the brightest of the gamers, and we're going to give you the categories and we're going to put them up against our champions, and they're going to play in a game, for example. Any game it can be, any of the gamers you've known through your career or you watched, and so they want to have the most physically skilled, the most mentally skilled, the most clutch, the guy under pressure, and then the guy who would, let me think what the last one was. The best chance at an upset. So those 4 things, any gamers, you pick them, you're the coach, and it's for the fate of the earth here, so you better don't fuck around here.
Well, firstly, obviously, they'd meet me and I seduce their race, but we'd all be fine, but hypothetically, so I've got to pick the gamer that can physically the most skilled? Physically the most skilled, skilled at games. Physically the skilled at games, video games, not just best aim. Yeah. All right. And then what's the other one? Smartest, most best mental skills. Yeah. And then best under pressure. Most likely to cause an upset. And the one most likely to cause the upset. All right. Most talented gamer I've ever met. Across multiple games or one game. Talented in skill. I know a lot of gamers. This is tricky. I would pick Forrest. Yeah, because he can play every fucking game to a professional level if he wanted to. You have no idea. Like I played him.
You know I'm mad you're going to make Quake players that you're saying that.
Huh?
Quake players are going to be mad that you've listed a Counter-Strike guy. Most skilled ever.
No, if he played Quake, he could be just as good. I played a 2v2 with him, and I actually forgot to plug my laptop in, so I was playing on a laptop. But actually, he kept up, right? And then he played Dota 2, and then he was like, "Look, this kid's good." Like he's just naturally like one of the most talented gamers I've ever seen, Forrest, and he could be pro at like pretty much anything. There's a couple near him. I don't want to mention. I don't want to like dumb it down, but Forrest is the most skillful gamer that I've come across. There's a few close ones to him, like Fox and so Forrest. Then next one. To be able to break down any game in a, I would put it's a toss-up. I'm gonna go with. I'm gonna probably go with Rafa, or there's a couple close to him. But the thing is about Rafa is that he wasn't the most talented Quake player, and he had to win off his smarts. And so I personally think if Rafa played any game, I think he would figure out how to be able to beat the game. I think Fox is like my all-round favorite gamer, and like because he's got everything. But I think Rafa on that one. Okay, under pressure. Best guy under pressure in esports. Not me when I'm drunk. Pretty good though. Someone under pressure. I think it might be Fatality, just because he just believes he can do anything. I mean, seriously, like there's no such thing as pressure. I mean, if I took him to a club, he'd think he could probably get any girl in there because he's delusional, and just because of that, he might. So when he's in a situation where he's losing or under pressure, he'd probably be like, "Guys, I've got this." Team America, fuck yeah! Like you just be like, "Fuck it." Well, he might now because but yeah, he's probably one of the best under pressure. I don't think he gets nervous. He's a true competitor, and that's what made him really good. All right, last one.
The guy who would be most likely to cause an upset, so he doesn't have to have any of those games, but he's the guy you could just put something there, maybe just something.
Random talented guy, yeah. Right, could be any game versus the aliens, so we don't know. Right, most randomly cause an upset. Obviously, I'm gonna go with me or Faz. Maybe Faz, because he's really talented. You don't know what he's thinking because he's probably smoked too much over the years. He's got a really weird way of like playing games, but you always know if the stars align, he can beat anybody, and he's actually an all-round very talented gamer. So the thing is, if I was to put him in, versus the aliens, I'd be like, Faz, I don't know what's going to happen in here. There seems to be a monkey on fire in the stadium, and whatever, but go in and just make something happen. And I reckon that he'd be able to make something happen. So probably Faz. Yeah. There you go. That was a long answer. It took a while to think about. It was a serious question. It was the most important question of the interview.
Okay, so to close up, give me like final thoughts for people who've watched the whole interview and gotten this far. Anyone you want to say hello to, thank you. The standard about.
All right, yeah. If you watched the whole interview, wow, well done. Sorry I talk so much, but I'm a commentator and I'm a bit of a megalomaniac. yeah, thanks for staying in esports, really. And if you're going to follow me in esports still, I only work with the companies and people that I find have integrity or want to help the community. So when I joined Twitch, you know, I felt it was the right choice for esports. When I do my studio, you'll see some of the sponsors that I picked, you know, and I picked them for a reason. And basically, just enjoy esports and what you do. Really, don't take it too seriously. Seriously, you're just playing video games. Have a drink.